Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our panel. My name is Mi-yeon Oh. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm a Korea chair at RAND. Welcome to our panel, Return of Shipbuilding's Golden Era, which is a very timely topic. So I'm really excited to hear from our esteemed panelists. So after years of cyclical downturn, global shipyards are now backed up with record-breaking order books, but also facing rising prices and increased pressure to innovate. From decarbonization-driven rebuilds to booming demand in LNG, containers, and defense, we will explore the big questions that this golden era raises. How long can this momentum last? What kind of ships and what kinds of shipyard will define the next decade? And is this boom simply the peak of another cycle or the beginning of a more strategic transformation of the maritime industry? And last but not the least, how are the geopolitical shifts, such as US-China tensions, affecting naval and commercial new builds? So we're very fortunate to have with us today a group of esteemed panelists who bring deep expertise from across the shipbuilding, finance, operations, and innovation. Danny Jin, partner at Alvarez and Marsal, and also you spent your career in the shipbuilding industry. So how do you like to define the new cycles of the shipbuilding industry? And in your view, what are the different factors driving these new cycles? And what can you please walk us through? Thank you, Danny.
So good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege to join at the World Knowledge Forum today. Today, I will reflect on the past shipbuilding cycles, and more importantly, share what I believe the critical condition for sustaining leadership in the next cycle. My name is Danny Jin from the Alvarez Marsal. So as you see, historically, the shipbuilding has been highly cyclical. The growth and decline were driven by post-war and post-war reconstruction and trade expansion and replacement demand. It is resulting in the upturns and downturns, as you see. That volume-driven cycle will continue to some degree in the future, but the cycle we are now entering is qualitatively different. It's another super cycle and defined by geopolitical volatility and decarbonization and technology transformation. The central question is no longer how many ships we build, but what value we deliver in the new environment. So here are three value drivers of new cycles. The first, geopolitics and geography. Green shipbuilding corridors, more than 60 initiatives worldwide, are emerging as credible demand and supply platform. For shipbuilder, this means aligning with the corridor project and offering vessel tailored to the decarbonization trade zone, and even specialized in act routes. This is how shipyard created differentiated value for ship owners. And the second one is the green transition. We know that LNG carrier remain the engine of today's cycles, supported by nearly 200 ports with bunkering capacity. But tomorrow, ammonia and methanol will drive the decarbonization agenda. This transition requires not only ship designs, but also large-scale investment in port, in bunkering, and the equipment as well. So Korea should continue to monetize its LNG leadership while positioning ammonia propulsion as the next growth frontier. And third is technology. Smart ship solution must be delivered as integrated offering for ship owners. Shipyards themselves must evolve, moving from labor-intensive model to technology-enabled ecosystem with future of shipyard and digital infrastructure, and even new service models such as analytics as a service. At the same time, securing the talent in autonomous navigation and digital ship operation will be essential. So I think that the technology is not a side note. It's an enabler of both green transition and geopolitical reliance. If you look at the past, the history shows that shipbuilding leadership has always shifted from US, Europe to Japan, and then Korea to China. The next shift will not decided by the scale over cost competitive, but by the ability to integrate fuel and technology and policy and finance. This is where the financing gap becomes critical. While ship finance remain active, but the investment in bunkering and port infrastructure lags significantly. For instance, for developing economics alone, the gap is estimated 55 to 83 billion dollars. So I suggest that blended finance will be essential, and the shipyard that's set up as a value integrator, linking vessel with infrastructure and finance. That shipyard will be set the competitive standard. So my message is that the renaissance of shipbuilding will not belong to the nation that only build ship well. It belongs to those that design and integrate fuel and technology and policy and finance together. I think that Korea already has the foundation, the leadership in LNG carrier, and proven innovation capacity in yard, and also production, and also access to the policy and finance platform as well. The challenge and the opportunity is to bring these elements together into one package. If Korea does so, I think that Korea also can stand at the center of next golden era of shipbuilding. Okay, thank you.
So James Forsythe, he's a managing director of the Lloyd Register Maritime Decarbonization Hub. So James, so Danny and Jinsu, they already talk about decarbonization, the green trend, which I believe that you like to go deep diver into the topic. So how do you see this climate policies and energy system investment today is influencing shipbuilding demand?
Perfect. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to my fellow panelists for setting me up so nicely, making it so clear to our audience how important climate action has been to the current landscape of shipbuilding that we find ourselves in, and to allow me to talk about how much it will continue to be important. To answer the question, I want to introduce two separate but linked concepts. The first one is policy and regulation. What are the regulations and the policies out there that are obliging the shipping industry to decarbonize, which is creating a regulation-based demand for more efficient, less polluting ships? So I'll talk about the policy framework. But I also want to talk about the industry sentiment and ultimately the consumer. Because these two things are contributing to the fact that climate action has greatly accelerated the demand for ships, but they actually have independent driving forces behind them. If we look at where the ship order book is at the moment, in 2024, there was an absolute explosion in relative terms of interest in alternatively fueled ships for the purpose of reducing emissions. Now, conventional ships burn heavy fuel oil. It's the sludgy oil at the end of oil refining process. It's burning a waste product. Decarbonization pathways are pushing us towards cleaner hydrocarbons and then eventually non-hydrocarbon liquid fuels, ultimately progressing towards the eventual ideal of having a hydrogen fuel system. And two of the interim steps on that journey, well, actually three of them. The first, as you consequentially get to less carbon intensity or less greenhouse gas emissions intensity, we start with natural gas, then we move to things like methanol and other ethyl alcohols, eventually going to ammonia. And in 2024, there was a huge expansion of orders, many of them coming to Korean shipyards, for methanol-fueled vessels. And this was not actually necessary due to the international policy. It was more the European Union's inclusion of shipping in their emissions trading scheme and the belief from major players in the industry, notably companies like Maersk, that they could secure themselves, with the benefit of their own scale, guaranteed production of green methanol. So in 2024, there was this sentiment that that was going to happen, and a number of ships were ordered, both by the direct people who thought they were going to do it, and then all the community of ship owners who want to be like those first movers. And then in 2025, there have been hardly any methanol orders. And the reason for that is very simply that Maersk announced that they wouldn't actually be able to source that methanol, and they were going to move back to LNG. And so in the space of just 1 year, on a sentiment cycle that was climate aligned, we went from huge interest that resulted in fixed contracts for shipyards that filled up orders to those orders not materializing. Now, the shipyards are still busy. I don't mean to say the shipyards are not busy, but in terms of climate action, that interest, that element of specification, fell off a little bit. Now, let's talk about the policy itself. So, for those of you in the room who might not be aware, the maritime sector is regulated by the International Maritime Organization, which is a UN agency who has purview over everything that ships need to do when they trade internationally. And the IMO has been working on a greenhouse gas regulation since, well, in practice, for more than a decade, but in its most recent iteration, since 2018. And it has reached a stage where it has agreed in principle the format of a price on emissions. So within the industry, we collectively now understand the mechanism that will apply a dollar cost to the grams of CO2 equivalent that a ship emits. And in October of this year, the IMO will be voting to adopt and enter into force this regulation. Now, if that happens, that is going to set the legal mandate for the effectively retiring over time, up until 2050, of the entire world fleet, and the replacement of that world fleet with ships that comply to the low carbon trajectories. So, if that happens, then quite clearly that's going to create a prolonged demand for ships in the shipbuilding sector. There are actually quite a few geopolitical things afoot right at the moment that makes us feel a little bit of concern in the 11th hour that maybe this policy will not enter into force, which we can talk about a little bit later. But across these two elements, there is a lot of in-industry action that is collectively pushing us to foreseeing a prolonged need for shipbuilding capacity of reduced carbon-emitting vessels. There's a major but, however, and that is a learning from the challenges that Maersk faced. The IMO's regulations, as I said, they have purview over the ship. They can tell the ship what to do. What they cannot do is tell the energy sector what to do. So nothing within our regulatory framework gives us direct influence over how the energy sector invests in the production of these molecules that we need. And because we are used to thinking as maritime, we have not yet collectively understood how to pool our requirements with other power-demanding sectors so that we may approach the energy sector and convince them to invest in producing the molecules that we need. And that's where my organization is now doing a lot of work. And I would encourage all forums like this one, which are multi-sector and a blend of industry and politics and policy, to start thinking about the cross-pollination opportunity of a nation's hydrogen economy and the maritime sector's assumed or assured demand for these fuels. And I'll round off with some numbers. So let's go back to those ammonia-fueled or methanol-fueled vessels. So the ones that are on the order book at the moment, they're around 200. There'll be about 200 methanol-fueled vessels on the water by 2030, roundabouts. Of ammonia-fueled vessels, there will be, with a high degree of sureness, maybe around 50, and with a bit of flexibility in the system, it could be as much as 100. Now, if I take the case of the ammonia-fueled vessels, let's say that in 2030, we could put all of those ships into one fuel-buying vehicle, and aggregate all of their demand in a year so that we could go to an energy producer and say, I guarantee this much demand for your product in 2030. If we were to do that, we would only be looking at about 1 million tons of ammonia a year. And if you are a producer, that's just not enough. It's just not enough to pass the extremely high FID burden to invest in making low-intensity ammonia. Producing ammonia is not the problem. Ammonia from fossil fuel-derived production is well established in the chemical industry, but its greenhouse gas intensity is worse than heavy fuel oil. So this is about producing green ammonia with a whole different infrastructure base, power base, feedstock base. And that's where we've got to get a little bit smarter, because that gap between what we need and what the energy sector is interested in giving us is massive. It's currently massive, and it will only be policy that helps us fix that.
Thank you, James. So let's talk about geopolitics that I think Mr. Lee Jin-soo really, it was a really great summary, China's subsidy and then how the global shipbuilding has changed it since then. So what is the potential impact of the re-emergence of the United States back in the global shipbuilding market, and particularly in the commercial shipbuilding? So I'd like to give you 2 minutes to each panelist, and then if there's any time left, I'd like to take one question from the audience. So Mr. Hansen, do you want to talk about geopolitics?
No, I would like to ask him a question.
Oh, sure. Question?
I expect crude oil to last for more than 200 years. I will not explain why, but the crude oil will last for another 200 years. That's my view, and I feel confident that will happen. Thank you.
James, do you want reaction?
Was that a question?
It was a comment, and I can ask for your view about it.
With pleasure, with pleasure. I'm a pragmatist, and fuel production pathways have to be achievable. Now, ultimately, we want the hydrogen molecule that we burn to produce power. Where we get that hydrogen molecule we should feasibly include in our planning that comes from hydrocarbons. Climate change is mitigated when you don't put new greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. And there are ways of including fossil hydrocarbons in your production pathways that allow you to make sure you achieve that outcome. So yes, I'm a pragmatist. Hydrocarbons play a role in our energy transition landscape. They will continue to do so. But what we really have to do is work out how to tightly control and manage emissions to atmosphere, because that's where we make the progress.
And do you also want to make a brief comment on the geopolitics, or?
I don't really want to, but I'm happy to try.
Okay.
So, I've spent my entire career in the shipping industry, and a big part of that, shipbuilding. I was in the shipyards for 5 years in China, physically building ships. And at that time when I was in China, we were tracking more than 2,000 active shipyards. That's a huge number when you compare that to the structure, for example, that you find in Korea, which is more group-based with massive capacity facilities in centralized locations. Fast forward to now, and it's not as many as that, but the scale of what is on offer in production across North Asia is hard to understate. It is massive. So then the question becomes, okay, well, what's ultimately driving a goal to try to reshore shipbuilding in places that are, as Mr. Lee very clearly sort of articulated, high-cost employment centers. Now, shipbuilding is not a profitable industry. It isn't. It needs a lot of state subsidy. It's entirely manpower hostage to manpower. And so it is great from a national security perspective, a labor employment perspective, a domestic capacity perspective, and the way in which it creates an ecosystem that fosters innovation and other forms of research and development. So for all of those reasons, shipbuilding is strategic. But in and of itself, shipbuilding is not a particularly attractive, profitable industry that brings margins to shareholders. So why does the US want more shipbuilding capacity. Obviously, there's the local employment. That is a very consistent angle of the current administration through multiples of sectors. I get that. But we also can't underestimate the capacity gap also in the defense space. You know, the rate at which China can put out military ships at the moment is astronomically high when you compare it to the rate at which the US can do that. So it's kind of the obvious elephant in the back of the room that is contributing to why this is necessary. Now, good luck to the initiative. It's a good initiative. I know that the Korean shipbuilding groups are involved in bilateral relations with the US to try to drive investment. Good. If it keeps people employed and it gets more ships on the water that are the right technology, that's good, but it's not without its challenges. It's definitely not without its challenges.
Great. I know that the time is up, but then I really would like to give 30 seconds or 1 minute to Mr. Hansen for the final closing comment. Thank you so much.
I would like to make 2 points.
Thank you.
A subsidized shipbuilding industry cannot survive in the long run simply because it uses taxpayers' money, and taxpayer will deny it. Secondly, all poor people, they would like to get out of their poverty and become wealthy. And you need oil energy to achieve this, to get out of poverty. Mao Zedong stepped out in 1978, and the transformation from Mao Zedong in 1978 and Chairman Deng until 2005 is the largest transformation of an ethnic group in modern world history. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much again for coming to our panel, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.